Hi, you're watching Hindustan Times, and I am Aditi Prasad. We are, of course, live right now. It's D-Day for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to take, for the Kamala Harris era in the United States. A short while ago, Donald Trump, the outgoing president, walked out of the White House for the very last time, and he's, of course, heading to Florida. He's not going to attend the inauguration event of Biden, which will begin shortly, making him the 46th president of the United States. We're going to bring you all the live updates, all the live visuals of what's happening at the U.S. Capitol right now. From there, many commentators in the U.S. and of course in the world are hailing this as a new era. They're calling the Biden-Harris administration a new hope after the divisive legacy, which they call of Trump, which is now almost what it is over. Over the next few hours, we will bring you live visuals from the west front of the U.S. Capitol, where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in. I have with me Hindustan Times consulting editor Pramit Palchaudhuri and foreign editor Rezaul Laskar, both of whom have tracked the U.S. presidential elections very, very closely. Also on our show tonight is former diplomat Rajiv Bhatia, who's had a 37-year innings in the Indian Foreign Service, where he served as ambassador to Myanmar as well as Mexico, among others. And of course, we have Sushant Sareen, who's going to be joining us shortly, senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. I want to start with you, Pramit. What's your sense of this Biden presidency? How easy will it be for him to emerge from the divisiveness that we've seen, which sort of marked the last 4 years of the Trump presidency?
Well, I think he's been fortunate that thanks to the Georgia Senate race completely going in his favor, he at least will have nominal control of both houses of Congress. So on the legislative front, he has a much better chance now of passing legislation than he looked like just right after the elections in November. Having said that, he probably will be a one-term president. And so he will effectively just have about 2 years before the midterm elections come in and possibly lose at least one of the houses of the Congress. So in that 2 year period, he will and can reverse a lot of Trump's decisions. He will be signing 15 executive orders as soon as he becomes president. And partly because Trump was too impatient to pass legislation often. That's actually very easy for him to do. The bigger issue, however, of repairing the enormous, I would say, class divide in the United States with a deeply alienated working class, largely white, but also incorporating Latinos and some blacks from the so-called coastal elites of the country. That is something he will attempt to correct, but that is something that cannot be done in 2 years, probably not even in 4 years. That's going to take a much longer time period, for much longer, I think, that President Biden has time to do.
Interesting. In fact, I'm going to request my team to put out the visuals, the live visuals from the Capitol, which we are getting. There is a lot of enthusiasm among Americans, among the people in among the people in the country, to actually see what this Biden presidency is going to mean going forward, and actually the entire world. And there you see, people arriving for the ceremony, the oath-taking ceremony at Capitol Hill. Pramit, Rezaul, actually, would you like to walk us through what we can expect over the next couple of hours?
Well, it's basically it's very similar to what we have during the swearing in of the Indian government. I mean, it's, but of course this is on a much larger scale. There's certain amount of pomp and ceremony associated with it. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as normal inaugurations because of COVID. There are a lot of other restrictions that are in place. And, we already have one element, which is the kind of unpredictability that has been associated with the last 4 years of President Trump. He's probably the sixth or the seventh president who is not going to attend the inauguration for his successor. So I mean, so it's in a sense it's a continuity, but at the same time, it's again also shows the kind of differences that have emerged in the last 4 years.
Right. In fact, I mean, the visuals that you see on your screen, I mean, this time, this oath, nearly 200,000 flags have been placed along the National Mall, where thousands of cheering Americans would have otherwise gathered to witness this inauguration. You're right that this is being held in very different circumstances. It's a very scaled down inauguration ceremony due to the coronavirus caseload, the rapidly rising caseload, and of course there is a increased and heightened security due to the events that transpired at the U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January. Let me bring in Mr. Bhatia. Mr. Bhatia, what are your expectations from the Biden ceremony, from the Biden presidency? How different is it going to be from the Trump presidency?
Well, I think it's going to be a big change, a welcome change. Essentially, the past 4 years have been, the time when the whole world, not just America, have been very deeply and quite often negatively impacted by the president who is about to depart from the scene. On the other hand, the one who's coming now in is somebody who's very different. He is a man of conciliation, consensus. He's a man who has worked in the system, who has known the people all around, and he obviously represents a different ideology. But I must say, he does not have a magic wand in his hand. I think today almost all scholars and observers of the American scene are agreed that there would be 4 of the major challenges that will engage the Biden administration very thoroughly. And 3 of them are really internal. Number one, the polarization and divisiveness that you spoke about. Number 2, the COVID pandemic. And number 3, the economy. So in all these 3 things, unfortunately, America, the largest democracy in the world, is in a mess. They will have to be addressed by the new administration. And the 4th, of course, are the foreign policy challenges. And among them, naturally, we would later, I'm sure, talk about the biggest of them all, the approach and strategy towards China. So in effect, if I could just make my last point, and it is that Mr. Biden is coming in as the president of the US and as leader of the world. And there is going to be a kind of a conflict between the 2 roles, because he has to first really concentrate on his domestic priorities before turning to start leading in the world. And yet the world will not allow him to the luxury of time, and that is where the urgency will come.
Right. He is going to take what he doesn't have the luxury of time on his hand. Pramit, would you sort of agree with that assessment made by Rajiv Bhatia?
Well, I think time and should we just say concentration, because he hopes very badly to be able to focus on domestic policy, as has been mentioned. And in many ways, his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken's primary job will be to try to keep foreign policy issues, especially crises, off his table, at least for the first one and a half years. But I would agree with the ambassador. I don't think the world is going to let him do that. And in particular, I don't think China is going to let him off the hook so lightly. Plus, he has other countries such as Russia and so on that he has problems with. So no, I would say he will not be able to do as much or spend as much on his domestic agenda as he would like. And one of the big tests
Right.
will be desire by the Biden team to reduce America's massive military budget and divert some of that money to this domestic agenda. And it'll be, I suspect he'll be largely unable to do that even after his first year in office.
But Pramit, the fact is that the domestic politics sort of needs a boost right now, because of this very fragile socio-political fabric, the divisions that Trump may be out, but the divisions that have taken root in the American polity over the last 4 years. Will they be as easy to fend off? Because in a very painfully fitting end to his presidency, Donald Trump earlier today took off on an Air Force One as Frank Sinatra's "My Way" sort of played on the tarmac, and um, and he's really done it his way, frankly, as far as the last 4 years have been concerned, and much to the chagrin of a lot of his detractors who was reversing age-old U.S. policies and doing things which many people and many experts and commentators really took offense at. How do you think it will be? Will it be as easy for Biden to sort of uh, you know he's called this a new beginning for America? So how easy for this is this new beginning going to be?
Well, you can see that his domestic agenda lays out a very clear policy path that he wants to take. He will, on the economic front, he needs to create jobs for the working class of America. There's still roughly 10 million Americans unemployed, and the numbers are still rising, as long as, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic, which continues to rage in America almost unchecked. So his first agenda will be an attempt to control the pandemic. I think he'll be relatively successful there, even if it may take a few months, if only because the vaccination program is starting to unfold, and that will help him. But on the domestic front, he's already wanted to get a huge infrastructure bill or set of infrastructure projects passed through to rebuild America, but create the jobs as a consequence. A lot of his economic policies in the initial phase will actually resemble that of the America First policies of Trump. He says he wants to limit government procurement contracts to American companies. He wants these infrastructure projects to be biased, if you wish, in favor of American contractors. A lot of his trade policy, whatever little trade policy he will do, will be about trying to ensure that America does not have to export her jobs anyway in some form or another. So a lot of his projects, but his really big ones are going to be, can he carry out, for example, some form of a green transformation of the economy? Put Americans, workers, to the job of repairing wind turbines and installing solar panels rather than digging out coal and so on, or jobs which are basically dying out.
Right.
These are the transformations he needs to accomplish, and those are going to be extremely difficult, the big ones.
Rezaul, what's your sense? How easy or difficult? And that you see in in the visuals, I think that's Bill Clinton sort of coming in there for the inauguration, the oath-taking ceremony. Sorry, I just saw him, so I sort of thought digressed. But Rezaul, what's your sense? How do you see? Do you agree with Pramit?
Well, the fact is, the kind of scenes we witnessed at the Capitol a few days ago, the storming of the Capitol, and the kind of violence that went on, and the fact that you have the National Guard and being brought in, and the FBI sweeping up people before the inauguration. I was speaking to a journalist friend who is right now in Washington from India to cover the inauguration, and he said he was speaking to somebody who was clearly a Trump supporter just near the Capitol, and was interviewing him. And within minutes, the FBI and other people came and swept up this fellow and took him away. They arrested him. So it's clear that Mr. Biden is coming into a very deeply divided U.S. I mean, he has to heal those wounds. It may not be very easy for him, but this is something he'll have to work at. He'll have to get back the economy on track. So it's going to be difficult. But at the same time, as Pramit pointed out, the world is not going to give him much time to kind of ignore the issues or not focus on the issues that are outside America.
Not focus on the issues that are outside America. In fact, as you pointed out just before this, we were sort of having a small discussion before we started this live broadcast, where Rezaul talked about the congressional panel hearings, the confirmation process, and three of the nominees, they offered their views at these congressional panels. Rezaul, how do you see do you see any change from how Trump decided to deal with the world versus how Biden will deal with the rest of the world?
I think the most significant congressional hearing for confirmation was the one for Antony Blinken, who is Biden's nominee for the post of Secretary of State. And the most striking part in that testimony was when he said that he agreed with the steps that Trump had taken vis-a-vis China, but what he said was that he deferred with the way he didn't agree with the way that Trump went about it. But that kind of shows you that there's going to be, maybe, as somebody said, it's going to be a continuity of the Trump approach towards China, but with a rebranding. Obviously, Mr. Biden is not going to be as confrontational as Mr. Trump, but we're definitely we are seeing from these Senate hearings that China is the primary concern. That's what the focus is going to be on as a competitor. But again, Blinken also said that there are areas where the U.S. would be willing to work in cooperation with China when it is in the mutual interest of both countries.
Okay, so Pramit, how would you see that?
On foreign policy, I would agree. I think that this broad strategy of Trump will remain the same. The tactics will be different. So Biden's team is very clear that China will be their primary strategic adversary, and the people that Biden has appointed into the State Department, into the Defense Department, whether it's people like Kurt Campbell, who's supposed to be the Asia czar in the National Security Council, Ellie Ratner, who will be handling a lot of the China policy in the Pentagon. These are known China hawks, people who take the Indo-Pacific seriously, believe that the containment or some sort of constrainment of China is essential. But tactically, there will be huge differences. I don't see Biden will eventually, I think, withdraw a little bit over time the tariffs that have been imposed because they don't really make any sense. But he will continue policies on 5G, for example, trying to build an alternative to China's dominance of 5G technology. We may not see so much emphasis on sending aircraft carriers out because I don't think they want to spend that much money on those type of things. However, continuing to invest in the Quad, military alliances, definitely in Asia, Japan, South Korea, so on, will be top priority for them. In fact, the Biden team is very clear that they believe that the way to compensate for reducing or at least not emphasizing defense expenditure is to build your alliances. Use diplomacy, if you wish, to compensate for whatever cuts in defense that you do. So again, that's a huge tactical difference from the unilateralism that Trump was noticeable for. But the ultimate aim of the policy remains the same.
Aditi, I was just wondering. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I was just wondering if I could throw something towards Ambassador Bhatia. If it's okay with you.
In fact, absolutely it's okay with me because in this work from home era, the lights in my house, I might get a power failure at any moment, and then I'm going to expect you to carry on the baton in my absence because it'll take about 3 to 4 minutes for me to come back. So please feel free. This is a freewheeling conversation. We're going to be here.
I was just wondering, a lot of international diplomacy is kind of, based on predictability. And the last 4 years under President Trump were possibly the most unpredictable kind of phase in US diplomacy. I was wondering if someone like Ambassador Bhatia, who has, dealt with this kind of a thing, is something, that people around the world are looking at. I mean, because there seems to be a collective sigh of relief around the world today that there will be some sort of predictability in the next few years.
Yeah. No, I think I do agree with both Pramit and Rezaul up to a point, but I would like also to present a somewhat dissenting view here. Before I talk about predictability or the lack of it, I think on that, the point that you are hinting is quite correct. America will now work through a system. It will work through bureaucracy and its star performers. There will be interagency consultation in full measure. And as far as I can see, there will be very few tweets, if any, by the president. So it's not going to be diplomacy by tweets. When Washington will talk, it will talk on the basis of interagency coordination and consultation. But the dissenting view, what I want to present is, there are two views on America's future foreign policy or Biden's foreign policy. One view is that it would be nothing but Obama 3.0. The other view is that it would be nothing but Trump's foreign policy with a more polite language and watered down rhetoric. Real life doesn't work like that. The fact is that Mr. Biden is entering the White House at a time when America stands changed and the world stands changed. It is not the world of 2009, and it is not even the world of 2016. The objective fact is that America today is a kind of a declining power, and China is a kind of a rising power. So the new leaders in Washington will have to take this into account and then proceed from there. What I can see is that, yes, indeed, as I said, there will be systemic approach to foreign policy. There will be a lot of politeness and civility. There will be a lot of consultation, bringing people together, allies, partners, friends, showing respect to them. All that is given. That is in the DNA of Democratic Party under Biden, and that is what will happen. At the same time, where I do agree with Pramit, and I think almost all observers are agreed on this, given the political configuration in the Congress, given the mood and the sentiment in America, and given also the public opinion and government opinion in the world, except in a handful of countries, which is all negative on China, Mr. Biden has no choice but to be fairly tough and realistic on China. This does not mean that he's only going to do confrontation. He's going to marry his conciliatory policy with his confrontational impulse or need. So you will see, in my humble view, essentially Biden and his team putting a stamp on America's foreign policy. We will have to simply sit and wait and decipher it.
So that I think is a point very well made, sir. In fact, both Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris are at the venue right now, meeting with the few people who are present there, and in a marked contrast to Trump avoiding masks at all stage, you can see that everybody there right now is sort of wearing masks, and there is. I don't see a lot of social distancing coming in through the visuals that we are getting, but everyone is wearing masks and taking all kinds of precautions as they're seeing as more and more dignitaries walk in for this thing. But I want to talk a little bit about Biden himself, as he walks through these glorious portals to take over the reins of the world's oldest and most powerful democracy. Actually, none better than him understands that this achievement of becoming the president has not come without a price or a sweat. This was Biden's third bid for the top office. The first being, I think, was in the 80s, and the second one in 2008. He takes charge of a very divided nation. Pramit, can you take us through Biden's rise and his coming of age as the president of the United States today?
Well, Biden, as you mentioned, he's largely been famous being a senator. He's been a senator for decades. I've forgotten how long, but he was a crucial part. He was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations, for example, when the Indo-US nuclear deal was done in 2008, 2009, and was a strong supporter of the deal and the Indo-US relationship. But because he was from a small state, he represented the state of Delaware, one of the smallest states in the United States. I think it's only about 600,000 people. It ensured that he had a very stable political career. Once you're a senator of a small state like that, you can normally be assured of continuing to win elections unless you make an enormous blunder. But it also meant that you have no large political base.
Right.
So as a consequence, unlike most presidents tend to come either from a region like the South, or from a big state like California.
There is some sort of feedback coming from you there.
For me. So what you're seeing, but so he had a stable, political base which and as a consequence, his runs to the presidency were always going to be extremely weak, and you saw them fail. But on the other hand, it ensured that because seniority in the Senate means that you rise in the ranks as the chairman, get the key committee memberships. He had a long and run in the US Senate. But one of the things about Biden was that he's considered an extraordinarily nice man. So Senator Lindsey Graham, one of Trump's most outspoken supporters, a very extreme right-wing individual especially in the past 4 years, but used to publicly say that Joe Biden is the nicest man he's ever met in U.S. politics, even though ideologically they have. So,
sorry, can I just stop you for a moment, Pramit? Rezaul, can you just? I think the output is playing somewhere at your end and it's coming on screen. So I'm putting you on mute till the time when you're speaking. Then you can just unmute yourself and just keep that audio down. We're getting a feedback. Thank you. Yes, Pramit, please continue.
So as a consequence, Biden had a long run as a senator. But he never, and he was a very good person in terms of putting coalitions together to pass legislation. But he lacked, I think, I would argue, two things. As I said, he lacked a major political base because he came from a small state. He was an Irish Catholic, not one of the more dominant groups in the United States. There've only been one other Irish Catholic, which is John F. Kennedy, and only a few other Irish presidents, Ronald Reagan being one. But Reagan came from a big state, the biggest state, California. So Biden was not famous even for, I would argue, for his ideas. He was literally a centrist. There have been studies when there are these indices about the voting patterns of American congressmen and ideologically, and one of the studies showed that Biden was like 50.1 on an index of 100, which meant he was right in the center ideologically in the United States in his entire political career. I will also add that there's only been one or two, I would even say major, but even one or two pieces of legislation that carry his name. Normally a sign of a congressman who has a lot of push and a lot of ideas. Biden doesn't have too much attached to his name. What Biden was good at was sitting there cobbling together coalitions, getting the right wing of the Republicans and the left wing of the Democrats and the guys in the middle to sit down and work out a deal. And as I said, because he was such an affable individual, very few people ultimately were prepared to defy him or were willing to come on board. And he was very good at sort of, and during the election campaign, you could see him kept saying the bipartisan spirit that I remember as a senator is something that I want to recreate.
Right.
Biden's rise has been not so much a rise, it's been more like a plateau. After becoming a senator, it's been sort of a steady, easy going. And you could see he was preparing for retirement. And then Trump arrived.
Right.
And I think largely because he was so horrified at Trump that he then decided to run for the presidency. And you understand he had to deal with Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire. Both of them were going to run. Bloomberg,
Yeah.
who wanted to also do the same thing, run to stop Trump, basically said, you run, I'll help you as much as I possibly can. If you start to fail, I will jump into the ring. And once one point Biden, as you know, began to look like he was going to lose to Bernie Sanders, Bloomberg then jumped in, not very successfully. But then when Biden suddenly surged, as the Black American population in particular we decided to go for him rather than Sanders, Bloomberg then steps back. So Biden, in many ways, has come out of retirement. And what is interesting is that he has sold his centricism. He sold his affability, centrism, his sense of being a part of a representative of America that was there before Trump, that I am going to be a nice guy who's going to try and heal the wounds of this country, and the sense that he's actually genuine about this. Most people look at him and say, yeah, actually, I believe this man. I don't know if he'll do it, but I believe that he wants to do this. And you saw him defeat a very strong left-wing challenge from under Sanders, partly because I think a lot of Democrats, definitely Black Americans and minorities, looked at Sanders and said, he is going to be a left-wing version of Trump. In other words, he's not going to heal wounds. He's going to make them worse because he's going to drive the party too far to the left. And that's why, and then eventually when Biden did run, of course, it was partly because he was able to rally so many independents. He was able to rally women voters in particular, who tend to be conservative, but who looked upon him as the person who could represent more than anything else, I think.
Right. So it's more of a, as you say, more of a plateau than a rise like this for him to finally be taking oath as the president of the United States and the most powerful democracy in the world today is really of a long way that he's come today. But as you were pointing about Bernie Sanders, even Biden's early statements sort of reveal sort of a social justice agenda. First business, he said that he would give a priority to businesses owned by Blacks and Latinos and Asians. Do you feel that his policies will lean towards the socialist policies advocated by Sanders? And I will come to. Please give me a response from it, and then I want to go with that to Mr. Bhatia.
No, he won't go as far as Sanders does. I mean, Sanders wants universal health care. He wanted free college education.
Right.
He wanted a set of other policies, and he wanted a Green New Deal, which would have basically been an enormous disruption of America's existing energy structure and a building of a completely new one. Well, in all of this, what has Biden done? Biden has said, look, I'll give financial relief to students who are taking loans to go to college or go through college. I will promote green power, and I think you'll see a fairly hefty shift, but I'm not going to sit down and shut down all the oil refineries of the United States and close down all the thermal plants. A lot of them are anyway shutting down on their own.
Right.
And I will boost Obamacare, the existing healthcare system that's there. Looks like my power has gone.
That's okay. Please continue.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go down the radical manner of Sanders.
Right.
Nothing as radical as that. So everything, yes, I'm going to do Sanders policies, but I'm going to do it in a much more moderate way. So that's what I think you're going to
So
see.
really, Mr. Bhatia, I'd like to come to you with that. The moderation which you earlier pointed out. He's going to do the same things, but he's going to be more conciliatory and moderate in his approach, not go as far left as Bernie Sanders. Would you? I mean, that sort of ties in with what you were saying earlier. Would you agree?
Thank you. I think first I wanted to just make a small comment on what Amit was saying earlier about the career of Senator, Joe Biden. It is true that it ran on a flat plateau for a long time, and he had this very prestigious position of being chairman, Senate
And
Foreign
I'm sorry,
Relations
sir, to
Committee.
interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was just Kamala Harris a while ago.
Yeah.
We saw her arriving, and we saw her on the screen. And of course, she's the person that we would be talking about next. But please carry on. Sorry, I just
No,
wanted
no,
to sort of,
I'm glad
yeah.
you did that. We also have already seen President Bush, President Obama. I thought I saw President Carter, but I cannot be sure. It's fantastic to see all these people coming together to give, really gravitas to the occasion. The point I was making is that Obama in his book discloses how he uh, thought back in 2008, 2009 to request Biden to be his vice president or vice presidential candidate and eventually becoming vice president. And at that time, Biden really thought about it because he actually said that from chairman Senate Relations Committee, it will be a climb down for him. Uh, Yet he eventually agreed. And later, Biden's mother, if I'm not mistaken, chided him as to why he even had second thoughts to be the vice president for Obama. So these little anecdotes tell us a lot about things. The way actually they disclose, they unfold in America. But the answer to your question, Aditi, when you talk about this conciliation or the middle of the road policy that he might adopt, I think we should use this occasion to point out that a lot of Indian experts on America know a lot about America's foreign policy and America's role in the world. But these developments in the past, you know, uh, 2 months since the election, has impelled a very serious interest in America's domestic politics. And I think Pramit is one of the very few people who are so well informed. People are not interested in America's domestic policy, but the point I'm making is that of those four issues that I enumerated, three are essentially domestic, and yet they all are interrelated with the foreign affairs because the world is interrelated today. So, uh, Biden, in order to solve the economic problem, has to look at the world. In order to deal with the COVID pandemic catastrophe that America is facing, he has to look around and see how others are doing it, and of course, the other issues as well. My final point for triggering further discussion with the panelists is this. A close reading of some of the famous American works shows that the image of American president is so majestic, so powerful. Air Force One, the White House, the Beast, the Secret Service, and all the rest of it. But reading, for example, the Obama book, I came to the conclusion that the presidency operates under very serious constraints. There is constraint of the Congress, there is constraints of some of the powerful committee chairs, there is the Wall Street, there is the American media, American television. So we have to recognize that given all this, Mr. Biden has a huge challenge and he will have to navigate his way very astutely and very carefully.
Yeah, a huge challenge, but with Kamala Harris, she's an extremely dynamic lady. You see her on the screen there. She's of course going to be with him, alongside him through this entire challenging presidency, as you say, that he seems to be facing. And there they are, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In a short while from now, of course, they will take oath. Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, is going to administer the oath to Biden, while Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will be sworn in by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Security agencies, of course, this entire all the visuals that we're bringing you, this entire swearing-in ceremony is, of course, under strict lots of security agencies there, including the National Guard and the FBI, are on high alert in the possibility of violence by the supporters, Republican supporters of the outgoing President Donald Trump. But Rezaul, let me bring you in here and let me just ask you, your sense of Kamala Harris. Of course, he has a very dynamic lady by his side, but he also has the highest representation of Indian Americans, including 13 women among in his core team, and among the prominent faces are Neera Tanden, who's going to be serving as the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, and Sabrina Singh, and Dr. Vivek Murthy, of course. He's the U.S. New U.S. Surgeon General. What do you make of this composition of his core team?
Well, I think it's just merely a recognition of, the amount of the very important role that Indian Americans are now playing in America's politics. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is a community that punches far above its weight. It has played a very important role even in the Trump administration. But obviously, I mean, Biden's team has a far greater representation of Indian Americans, and some of them in very key posts. I mean, there are people in the National Security Council. There are people, as you pointed out, in the health circles. So these are people who are going to weigh in and chip in on, decisions which are going to be very crucial for the president in the days to come. But whether that actually translates into some kind of a change or a greater, kind of a year to listen to India, I don't know. I mean, it's still up in the air. I mean, just having Indian Americans in the American administration doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to listen more closely to what is coming out of India. But
Right.
I mean, that's one point. But again, the other thing that you brought up, is something that I'd really like to watch is the dynamic between President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. She's clearly very different from other vice presidents. I mean, this is a lady who's broken several glass ceilings. The first, person of Indian American origin to occupy that post, the first woman to occupy that post, the first African American person to be elevated to that post. And clearly, she's somebody who is much more hands-on. I mean, she's going to definitely be, playing a more active role, I think, in decision making and in all sorts of matters.
Right.
That's where I want to ask a question to Pramit. Can I ask a question to Pramit?
Sure.
I reckon what Rezaul is saying, and that is where my question is coming in, Pramit. Now, I happen to think that, media's, and particularly Indian media's excitement over Kamala Harris is a little overdone. And I think while certainly Biden and she would bond together very well, it's very rarely in the history of American presidency that a vice president really plays a very, consequential role. On top of that, she is a lady of color, and Biden and the rest of the administration has to watch uh, for the fact that a huge part of America is affected by the racial bug, not just coronavirus. So, do you really feel that she would be able to play a very consequential role? Question to Pramit.
I would agree that the vice president's role in American policy is traditionally almost negligible. The famous line, I think, back in the 19th century was that the vice presidency is worth a jug of warm spit, was the word one vice presidential candidate described it as. But look, I think the only difference, the real difference that I see here, is what I mentioned about the question of Biden being a one-term president. Now, while he has never said it publicly, in the American press, there have been repeated pointers that he has said within his own team, I was only here to stop Trump, and I'm going to retire after 4 years. I'm an old man. He's very old. He'll be the oldest president in American history. So I don't plan to be running for a second term. I don't have it in me. We'll see. Maybe he'll change his mind. But he's working under that assumption. So when he chose a vice presidential candidate, he made it very clear that he wanted somebody who had run for the presidency, somebody who sought to be the president and who had executive and elected experience. So she has been, a senator, attorney general of California, which is an elected position. California, as you know, is the biggest state in America, so these are not minor positions, so to speak. So among all of the candidates he chose, he decided to choose her partly, or maybe even largely, because he wanted to have not just a female, because he'd always said he was going to have a female vice president. There were other female candidates. But because he wanted somebody that, when he retired, would be a fit for being the next president of the United States, or at least the next Democratic presidential candidate. So that means that, in many ways, if that's going to be if that is going to be what's going to roll out here, he is going to have to put her into positions of authority, because he has to ready her for the presidency, if you wish. Because senator is still not the same thing. And remember, she was only senator for 2 years, is still not the same thing as being ready to run the United States of America. So my sense will be that he will give her more executive roles, authority, and profile than we have ever seen a vice president in recent history, simply because he's going to assume that he's not necessarily going to be around for a second term. So that's where I see the difference, and we'll see whether that actually happens. But you're right, the vice president sits in Blair House, and often has no idea what's going on in the White House. And often the White House team structure eventually cuts the vice president out. And I would also add that Biden, because he was a vice president himself for such a long time, probably recognizes the structural problems that a vice president faces. And I'm going to assume he's going to go out of his way to try to break that if he really sees her as his rightful successor to the White House.
Okay, that's a very interesting assessment coming from you. I'd just like to go over to the Capitol and sort of see what's happening. I think the inauguration ceremony started, but let's just dip in and see what's happening there.
I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible, my friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda until I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially began the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank the Joint Committee staff and our partners, particularly our security partners, for the way they've dealt with unprecedented circumstances. When I chaired the inauguration 4 years ago, I shared President Reagan's 1981 description of this event as commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Miraculous because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Americans have celebrated this moment during war, during depression, and now during pandemic. Once again, all three branches of our government come together as the Constitution envisions. Once again, we renew our commitment to our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union. That theme for this inauguration, our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union, was announced by the Joint Committee before the election with the belief that the United States can only fulfill its promise and set an example for others if we are always working to be better than we have been. The Constitution established that determined democracy with its first three words, declaring the people as the source of the government. The Articles of Confederation hadn't done that. The Magna Carta hadn't done that. Only the Constitution says the government exists because the people are the source of the reason it exists. They immediately followed those first three words with the words to form a more perfect union. The founders did not say to form a perfect union. They did not claim that in our new country nothing would need to be improved. Fortunately, they understood that always working to be better would be the hallmark of a great democracy. Freedoms we have today, the nation we have today, is not here just because it happened, and they aren't complete. A great democracy working through the successes and failures of our history, striving to be better than it had been. And we are more than we have been, and we are less than we hope to be. The assault on our Capitol at this very place just 2 weeks ago reminds us that a government designed to balance and check itself is both fragile and resilient. During the last year, the pandemic challenged our free and open society and called for extraordinary determination and sacrifice, and still challenges us today. Meeting that challenge head on have been and are healthcare workers, scientists, first responders, essential frontline workers, and so many others we depend on in so many. Together, the Congress and the courts join the transition of executive responsibility. One political party more pleased today and on every inaugural day than the other. But this is not a moment of division, it's a moment of unification. A new administration begins and brings with it a new beginning. And with that, our great national debate goes forward, and a determined democracy will continue to be essential in pursuit of a more perfect union and a better future for all Americans. What a privilege for me to join you today. Thank you. I'm pleased to call to the podium a longtime friend of the president-elect and his family, Father Leo O'Donovan, to lead us in an invocation. Please stand if you are able and remain standing for the national anthem and the pledge to our flag.
Okay, that is the pledge being taken, and the national anthem will follow immediately afterwards. So these are, things that are happening there right now on our screen. You can say this is, of course, Reverend, who's a longtime family friend of the new U.S. President Joe Biden. Shortly after, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will administer the oath of office to Biden, while and Kamala Harris will of course be sworn in by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. All of that is going to happen shortly. In the meantime, we can I think what I really wanted to talk about before we sort of started talking about Joe Biden is particularly about the Biden administration's foreign policy. A few days ago, Mr. Bhatia said his Secretary of State Michael Pompeo launched a very unusual Twitter victory lap, telling a story about the American foreign policy that could really we didn't read anywhere else. Would you agree with some of the things he talked about, which is really that the Trump administration had done differently? If, of course, you were privy to the tweets of Secretary Pompeo, Mr. Bhatia?
My considered view is that Secretary Pompeo, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Sorry. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yes, can hear
Secretary
you.
Pompeo, was a Secretary of State. He did some of the good things. He certainly brought action in the India-US relations. But I must say that the day he, at a press conference at the State Department, announced with a complete straight face, and this was well after the election and the results had been announced, he said, yes, here at the State Department, we are preparing with the second Trump term. I think that one single sentence ruined legacy. I think it came out that he was a loyalist rather than a powerful with some independence of his own. independence of mind. The
Well, he's to be
latest
he's
statements and steps and his trying to visit here and there.
I'm unable to sort of get your
Yes.
audio very well, sir. Pramit, are you able to hear Mr. Bhatia very well?
Just some parts of it. I heard you were saying talking about.
Yeah, we were not able to.
Okay.
Your audio is getting cut off. Maybe you can just check your audio
Yes.
once. And in the
Okay.
meantime, Pramit, would you like to take that? You saw the Twitter Raj he sent out about Secretary Pompeo about how great the Trump administration had been about in various foreign policy initiatives. How do you feel about that? And would you agree with that Twitter victory lap of Secretary Pompeo?
Well, yes, Pompeo, as you said, has been tweeting regularly for the past 2 weeks, pointing out all of the great what he sees as the great successes of the Trump administration. The bulk of the tweets, I haven't seen all of them, but the bulk of the tweets have been about China, about sanctioning China on the Uyghurs, calling out China on the South China Sea, imposing tariffs and so on. And I think while you can disagree with individual policies, I don't think tariffs are a particularly sensible action. If you're going to do trade sanctions, there are better and more sensible means to do so. But what Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, is correct in broadly saying is that more so than definitely the Obama administration, the Trump administration called out China. They were prepared to deal China some very hard punches. They were prepared to openly say that China, in terms of its surveillance tactics, in terms of its debt entrapment of nations, its use of military bully-boying tactics, its use of its repression of human rights among its own people or in places like Hong Kong, and its complete and total irrelevance for Chinese policy of almost any international agreement that it had signed, whether it was Hong Kong, whether it was the WTO, whether it was UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea. China simply didn't care. And I think that there Pompeo's right. Traditionally, what often happens in large governments is that certain policies become stuck, if you wish, in a certain groove, and the bureaucratic system.
And I just want to draw your attention to what's happening in terms of there on the thing. I just want to go. I think she's about to address. Let's just listen into what she has to say, and then we'll of course come back.
I think she may be singing the national anthem.
You want to take us through what's happening there right now, Pramit?
I think she's going to sing the national anthem, isn't she?
Yes, she is, and all the people have been asked to stand along with her.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight? On the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombers in
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the city of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
All right.
That, of course, is Kamala Harris being sworn in as the Vice President of the United States. In fact, 48 men before her have served as the Vice President of the United States. Most of them, the only diversity there one we could find was whether one was wearing a bow tie or a regular tie. But that role has changed today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's Own United States Marine Band.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking down that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that in the skyway, I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, oh, this land. This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, oh, this land. This land was made for you and me. You and me. Oh, from sea to shining sea. Una nación bajo Dios indivisible con libertad y justicia para todos. Let's get loud. This land was made for you and me.
Well, that was great. The sun is shining, and Mr. President-elect, this is the first inauguration in the history of America where J-Lo was the warm-up act for Chief Justice Roberts. With that, it is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, to administer the presidential oath to the next President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
That, of course, is history being created there, a moment of political triumph for Mr. Biden, really, because he is, of course, the highest political office has always uh, eluded him, despite a decades long career in the public office, spanning almost 8 presidents. But the nation's highest office had always eluded him, of course, until now. But I really want to talk about, till the next.
My fellow Americans,
All right. So, my fellow
the
Americans,
moment
please
we
listen in.
have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Senator McConnell, Vice President Pence, my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day. Day of history and hope, renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. At this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken. Oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we the people who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far. But we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once in a century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words, requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment, and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. We can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. no nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. And unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America. We've acted together. So today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh. All of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again. Hear one another. See one another. Show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War. And the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand, where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand, across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably from the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, the saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lie. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed staring at the night. Rural versus urban, or rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this. Shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. No accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. This is what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. Not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. In my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all of those who we lost this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them for becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, the climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up? all of us. It's time for boldness, for there is so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch, but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet
the sound. Then say a wretch like me, I once was lost, but now I am. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united.
ऑडियो चला गया, क्या हुआ?
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Hard not to be reminded of President Obama's singing that same song at the Mother Emanuel Church. Song that in our culture is as close to both poetry and prayer as you could possibly come. And we're going to finish with those two things. Let me introduce Amanda Gorman, our nation's first ever National Poet Laureate.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Thank you, Amanda Gorman. Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware. a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
That's history in the making, ladies and gentlemen. Especially with uh, Joe Biden's speech there. You could have, his inaugural speech. You could actually virtually count the number of times he spoke or he said. I just mute the audio here and. Yeah, that's the number of times that he said that he said the word unity and togetherness in his entire speech. I mean, that's what stood out for me. Sushant has joined us now, Sushant Sareen from the Observer Research Foundation. Sushant, your first views on Joe Biden's inaugural speech, and of course, then we got to talk about the history that was made in the United States today with Kamala Harris taking oath as the first female vice president of the country. Sushant, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. Wait, let me try. Yeah, I've unmuted you. Please carry on.
Okay, thanks, Aditi, for having me. See, as far as the Biden speech was concerned, what was remarkable for me as an Indian or as a global citizen, if you will, was that he virtually did not speak anything about foreign policy or the rest of the world. I think the focus was primarily domestic.
Absolutely.
Priorities were very clear. It was firstly the virus. I think virus and unity were the two underlying themes of his entire address, and perhaps unity even more than the virus. But
yeah.
And I frankly I couldn't help notice exactly what you just said, that the number of times he used the word unity almost sounded like a third world leader speech, because it's in countries like India and other places where this is a constant theme that we must be united, we must be united.
But you can't really blame him given the scenes that unfolded on Capitol, the US Capitol on the 6th of January this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. See, maybe, people like us in India, in fact, not for many years now, but maybe in countries like ours, we take these things in our stride. It's something quite novel for the Americans, what happened just a couple of weeks back. And frankly, it was a bit of a scary scene, what was happening out there. But having said that, I think the fact that he was repeating unity so many times tells you how broken America is in at least politically, how divided the country is politically, and how much will have to be done to actually start, mending the kind of divisions which exist in the American polity and in the American society. I don't think anybody could have taken any exception to the words which President Biden used, but actually delivering on those words and actually trying to bring people together, I don't think is going to be very easy, because while he might want to try and he might actually be sincere in wanting to doing that, there are many people in his own ranks who are very unforgiving, who are wanting to bay for blood, who will be extremely vindictive and vicious towards the opposition. The kind of language which is used to address people with whom you don't agree. And while it was all very well for President Biden to say that we have to hear people, we have to see people, we have to listen to them and respect them. Frankly, I don't think any of these things were happening, not just from the right, but also from the left. And that was, for somebody who has always admired American society, American polity, the kind of freedoms which exist out there, the absolutism with which freedom of speech is allowed, to see people being shut down, to see expression being constricted, and to actually start demonizing the other for certain views which they held. Of course, and not everybody who was being demonized held extremist views, But anything which you don't agree with, and we see that increasingly in India, Aditi, that you don't agree with somebody, so you start attaching labels to them, you start attaching very base motives to those people. And I think those challenges are going to be far more difficult to surmount than anything else. So yes, the virus will come and the virus will go. Its ravages will stay, both physical as well as economic. But how do you address the virus which has afflicted the body politic? And I think that is going to be his real challenge. If he can manage to deliver on that, I think everything else will fall in place. Just one last point, I don't really envy President Biden. I think he has, in some ways, he has the toughest job any American president has had, because normally American presidents, whether we like it or not, were seen to be the people who had to keep the world together. Here is a guy who doesn't only have to keep the world together, but he has to keep America together. So I think he has a lot more on his plate, and whether he will have the bandwidth to deliver on that, I think that is what is really the million-dollar question for me.
Will you have the bandwidth to deliver on that? That one, and your point about unity being the underlying factor. Let me start with there, and then I just want to take that question to Pramit and Rezaul also. The scenes that unfolded on the Capitol. That of course was probably why the entire emphasis seems of Biden seems to be on domestic politics, as Sushant pointed out. Do you really, I was speaking to the former ambassador to the United States, Arun Singh, a while ago, and he said that remember that 75 to 80 million Americans voted for Trump and they support Trump and what he stood for, and therefore the divisions in the American socio-political fabric right now are at a really high, are at an all-time high, even worse than when Trump came in 2016. So, Pramit, my question to you is: do you think that's like a tall order, as Sushant seems to think, for Biden to resolve going forward? And because that is really going to be his first task, to unite the country, the togetherness, because they're facing adversities from really every angle, from the pandemic, the economic front, and everywhere else.
Yes, it's going to be difficult because the divisions, in particular the economic inequality, that I would argue underlies the present problems in the United States. So inequality that has become racialized over time is something that began in the 1980s. We saw the figures drop for white working class, their incomes, the destruction of their jobs, livelihoods, and then slowly their sort of collapse into drugs, and a political narrative, a very poisonous political narrative that they blamed not only their white elite brethren, but all minorities and immigrants and so on, and now has metastasized into a particularly poisonous narrative in which they basically don't believe anything their own government says. They don't believe their own electoral system. They have these bizarre conspiracy theories like QAnon, and so on, which have now gripped their minds. And their division is so strong, they no longer listen to the same television stations. They no longer read the same newspapers. Now, I would suspect they will no longer even share the same social media platforms. So this division is something that goes back over, has been developing for 30, 40 years. So you can't expect Biden to resolve this in 2 to 4 years. The only hope that, what we can hope that he will accomplish, he'll lay the basis for a consensus within the American establishment that this has to be resolved, that these are not just kooky people who should be just put in jail and forgotten, but there's a far larger social problem that has to be resolved, and that over the next 10, 20, whatever years, generation, they'll dedicate themselves to resolving that. And second, he has to resume at least some form of economic activity. for this class, a sense that at least their government is trying to resolve this problem and give some economic relief to them. And at least that hopefully will ensure that a degree of social violence within the country will at least be reduced.
Okay. I want to go to Rezaul. I want to ask you how, this entire thing that we saw, with Trump not attending his successor's oath-taking ceremony. Do you believe that, if Trump had attended the oath-taking ceremony, a little bit of those divisions could have been, at least the Trump supporters and the ravaging of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th this year, if Trump had attended the oath-taking ceremony and this inauguration ceremony, do you think it would have sort of sent the right message to his, miffed followers who are miffed by his exit?
I think I'm
Rezaul?
on mute. Yeah. Sorry. You have to keep in mind the fact that President Trump's followers are not, they're a totally different bunch of people. And Trump attending this ceremony would have possibly not gone down very well with his followers. This is a man who's already talking about, being back in some form. He's hinted to his aides that he wants to, although he realizes that he's going to be 4 years older, but he would like to try again to have another shot at the presidency in 4 years' time. So, it wouldn't have fit in with his game plan. And, this was just Trump being Trump, and as Pramit said, I think now the task is up to President Biden. He's got to set the base. It's not going to be done overnight, but, again, I'd like to, point out one thing. I can't remember the last time I heard a US president use the words domestic terrorism and white supremacy in a speech. This is somebody acknowledging, somebody acknowledging the problems that are there. They're not going to be easy. They're not going to be, it's not going to be handled in a week's time. There are people who are now talking about, possibly even before Biden gets to the job of, rebuilding, healing, uniting people, when his team gets in and they're saying that, we don't even know the kind of damage Trump has done before he left. They'll probably have to spend a lot of time cleaning up the mess before they get to the task of rebuilding, healing, uniting people. And it's only then that you could look at, the foreign policy dimension of things, which, as all the panelists have pointed out, was not the top priority in President Biden's speech today.
Yes, absolutely. I very, very, aptly noticed the word terms white supremacy being spelled out by and domestic terrorism being said by a president in his inaugural speech there. Sushant, your take on this, please.
While I agree with both Reza and Pramit, see, the question which worries me is that why are we discussing what's happening in America? Do we have this kind of saturation coverage to an election, for example, in Germany or in Britain or in Russia, for whatever the election in Russia goes by? We don't really do it. The reason why we discuss America the way we are doing it is because America is everybody's neighbor. But if America turned inwards during Trump and is likely to turn even more inwards during the Biden administration, and going to be more bothered about how they are going to handle their domestic issues, then what does it do to America's role in the world? What does it do to America's hyperpower position in the world? So I think that is a question we need to think about. And that is something which the Biden administration will have to think about very carefully, because if the entire focus is going to be domestic, what happens to the rest of the world? Then the rest of the world looks for their own options and their own fallback positions. So clearly they will have to do both of these things together. And while it's no place for me to advise what the American president should have said or should not have said. But I would have imagined that had he laid out a few things about what his foreign policy priorities or his global vision is going to be in his inaugural speech, I think it would have sent a salutary message to the rest of the world. Not having done that, maybe he'll do it later. But I think that is something which does raise some concerns in me as to what exactly is America's role going to be in the rest of the world.
I think primarily his target and his audience right now is the domestic audience that he's sort of feeding right now, given what has happened, given the very very chaotic exit of Donald Trump from the presidency. Because at first Donald Trump said that we're not going to. He disputed the the presidential election results. Then there was the storming of the U.S. Capitol on Jan 6th, and then of course he became the first U.S. president to be impeached twice in that much. You can say that Trump's exit or the end of the Trump era has actually overshadowed Biden's path to the presidency and his rise to the. Would you agree with that, Pramit? I'd like to come to you with that.
Yeah, I mean the point that one thing I have to remember about just inaugural addresses, they tend to be extremely domestic, especially since the end of the Cold War. Most of these speeches have been domestically oriented. You may remember Trump's very unusual inaugural address where he kept saying America first, and he used, should we say, almost a unpresidential tone of language. He kept saying, he says, I'm going to be America first. It's all going to be about America first. He indicated, in fact, that he would have an extremely isolationist foreign policy. And yes, his foreign policy was both erratic and not necessarily the foreign policy element of it was unusual. But in the end, he was still active globally, particularly against China. And that was not evident in his inaugural address at all. I think Biden wants desperately to focus on domestic issues, but as we discussed earlier, I don't think the world is going to let him, and I don't think Beijing in particular is going to let him stay at home.
Yeah, in fact, Rezaul, I want to come to you with because you'd been following the congressional panels which are beginning the confirmation process of Joe Biden, and you were saying that the Biden administration policies are really not going to be very different from the Trump administration policies, especially on China. Given what you heard at these congressional panels, would you want to elaborate on that?
The first point before I start on that, I totally agree with Sushant on one point that he made. They possibly, if there had been a hint of what Biden has, the vision he has for the world, it would have really helped. But having said that, there was one key element which the world could take note of, and that was, he kind of said that, look, America is back. We are going to be back in the game. And this is something that, figured very, very prominently in Antony Blinken's Senate hearing, confirmation hearing, that he kept saying this, that, look, if we are going to influence the world, if we're going to influence things around the world, we have to start playing a leading role again. We have to start leading in institutions, in global international institutions. We have to re-engage with our allies. We have to rebuild. We have to get back their trust. Basically saying that, look, America wants to be back, despite all the other issues that are on the table, on the plate. So, I mean, that's one, fact that you get. But also in all the other confirmation hearings, the other thing that came across very, very clearly is that in foreign policy, the focus is going to be on China. Lloyd Austin, who's the pick for heading the Pentagon, said that, globally, the biggest, the most pressing challenge for the US is China.
Right. Thanks for that point, Rezaul. I think they're going to walk down the stairs and go to the White House now. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris walking down the stairs and on their way to the White House. Um, so they'll be, of course, reaching there shortly. That's a fantastic photo op, stopping in between to sort of chat with each other and their spouses. Um, so yeah, uh, I really want to talk about Kamala Harris. Uh, so in a way, I mean, while we're talking about Biden, it's really Kamala Harris who's sort of made history today. The 48 men before her who served as the vice president of the United States, and the only diversity you could talk about in those was whether they were bearded or balding or had a mustache. That has changed. I mean, she's really the first woman president of the United States to take oath, and interestingly, she has made history. But what will she do with that history? And Sushant, really, if you want to come in on that.
So look, you know, frankly, most of the vice presidents have had a very little role to play. They haven't really been very active as vice presidents, except for a couple of exceptions. Of course, this time it's being speculated that she's not going to be a wallflower, but she will be a very active, person in the administration. Her opinions are going to be
And
taken.
before this, Pramit was actually making that point, and Pramit, I will come to you. Maybe you can sort of make your point again for Sushant's benefit. Yes, please carry on, Sushant.
Yeah, so I think maybe she will have a lot to say in how the administration functions. Now, whether that's good or bad, that's for the Americans to decide. And frankly, I'm quite agnostic towards her. I don't share any of the excitement, whether in Tamil Nadu or in New Delhi, that she's an Indian American. I think she's an American. She's an American vice president, and I look at her like that. Her gender might be important for some people. It's not important for me. Yeah, well, it's a novelty that the first woman has become the vice president. But I look at her as a politician, I look at her as an administrator, and I look at her as an American because number one, frankly, she has never really owned up her Indian heritage. So I don't care very much for that. And even if somebody was to own up their Indian heritage, but not really bad for India, frankly, I don't care much for that. Which is why I'm also not very kicked or very excited about 20 or 25 or Indian Americans becoming part of the administration until and unless these are people, who will be batting for India. And I don't see any reason why they should. Ultimately, they are Americans. So we should treat them as Americans and not get very excited about that. So frankly, on whether it's Kamala Harris or anybody else, I look at them as individuals, as politicians, as administrators, and I will evaluate what they are on the basis of how they perform, rather than on gender or on color or whatever else. So that's my position, frankly.
That's great. I mean, my idea was never to tout her as a Indian American vice president because you're right. She's never really owned up to her Indian heritage. But more about the first woman president. It's actually I mean, she's made history becoming the first woman to reach the high office, that high an office in the United States. And Pramit, of course, was making a point earlier about how she's she's going to be a real game changer in the years to come as far as the democratic dispensation is concerned. Pramit, would you like to sort of just come in on that again?
No, I was just making the argument earlier that if news reports in America are to believe, Biden has indicated that he will only be a one-term president, that he came in largely to stop Trump. He's 78, he'll be the oldest American president, and he doesn't see himself being able to do second term. He may change his mind. Ambition is there, who knows, and if his health holds out. But he chose deliberately a vice presidential candidate who he thought would have to become a president in 4 years. And that was one of the reasons he chose Kamala Harris, is because he said, I want a woman that he'd already promised, but I want somebody who showed the desire to be president, and who has already held elected office with some degree of success. And she, of course, was a senator like he was, as well as the Attorney General of California. So my sense would be that if this does hold true, he holds to the idea that he will only be a one-term president, and therefore Kamala Harris he sees her as his natural heir, at least as the next Democratic Party nominee, a presidential nominee. What we will see with Kamala Harris will be an attempt to train her, if you wish, to be prepared for the Oval Office. This would mean that she may end up having more of a role, definitely higher profile, than the average vice president does, especially in the first term of a president.
So she could be the successor, so to speak, in case
Make her be a successor. Yes.
Yes. But Rezaul, I want to really come to you with one additional question, and I think we'll wind up in the next 10 minutes or so, which is really about Trump is Biden is likely to sign a slew of executive orders to reverse Trump's policies, and most important being on climate, as soon as he enters office. How do you see that? What are the key things that you see immediately happening?
Well, I'll just go back to what I'd said earlier. A lot of foreign policy, a lot of diplomacy is predicated on predictability. And, people like having somebody whom they can be, who's to some extent predictable. So, the rolling back, we are hearing that he's going to sign about 15 executive orders. Obviously, things like climate change is something that, even India is interested in. India has taken a very leading role under Prime Minister Modi to address climate change. So these are things that matter. I mean, but a lot of the other things are also domestically related, but of course, you also have things like ending the travel ban, some of the other issues. So it just helps the world kind of get to feel that maybe there's somebody again here in the White House who is going to act along predictable lines. But at the same time, he's also signaled that, you were talking about the China policy. We mentioned that, it's not going to be radically different from what Trump did, but I think it's going to be different in the way they go about it. So it's in some places there's going to be continuity, in some places there's going to be a tremendous amount of change.
Right. Sushant, you talked about Biden and foreign policy and the U.S. role in the world, and the overall sense. And since we're sitting in India, let's talk about India. The overall sense we get is that the Biden government is likely to be friendly with India. He himself has called the Indo-U.S. partnership the most important, so to speak, for a safe future for the world. 15 years ago, he was part of a team that got the Indo-U.S. Civil nuclear deal on track. So, what is your sense? What is your view on his orientation towards India? You said you're not impressed by the 20-odd Indian Americans in his core group. What do you feel will be the overall stance over India with India?
As far as the Indian Americans are concerned, I think my view of them, probably we can discuss it off the record. It might not be very palatable to many people on record. But see, the thing is, I would wait and see how things are going to play out. For example, we are hearing about the Americans thinking about imposing the CAATSA sanctions on India, on the S-400.
Right.
Now, will that be a slap on the wrist, as some people are speculating, or will that be a little more than a slap on the wrist? If there is a sanction regime which comes into place, then what does it do to the confidence levels which India has to have in America to get into a deeper embrace with Americans? But that's from our point of view. From the American point of view, again, I think there are some conflicting signals coming. The Secretary of State designate his confirmation hearings, and some of the other cabinet members, their take on China, for example, is something which enthuses me about the policy of the new administration. However, there are also indications that the Obama model in one form or another, where they were more interested in engaging China, and then working towards moving forward with China rather than confronting China. If you go back to that model, then it's game up as far as the US is concerned, because I don't think they have that luxury anymore. They've already conceded a lot more to the Chinese in the Obama years than they should have. And of course, there were things which went wrong in America, the financial crisis and all of that. Even so, I think if you're going to go back to that template, then it does not inspire any confidence in me. Similarly, on a range of other issues, if, for example, we know that there is this extreme left wing also, which is part of the Biden political milieu, and if they start imposing themselves, whether it's be on certain concerns on human rights or India's domestic politics or what is happening in the region, if they start interfering on that, I think that again is going to drive a spoke in the wheel as far as Indo-US relations are concerned. So keeping fingers crossed, because I actually also believe that we have a lot more to gain from a closer relationship with the Americans than rather than throwing a fit on every small issue which crops up between us and the Americans. But having said that, I think there would be certain red lines which I think the Americans should respect as far as India is concerned. Because if they violate those, that does not mean that the relationship is going to go bust, but it does mean that the relationship is not going to go very far.
I see Pramit shaking his head. Pramit, there are irritants like Article 3, abrogation of Article 370, NRA, CAA. Biden administration is likely to make noise on all of this. Is that noise likely to irk the Modi government beyond the obvious?
No, I don't expect too much noise. I expect the Biden administration will raise these privately. That's the Biden tradition, or even not also to some degree the Obama tradition. They will make noises somewhat, I think, similar to what the European Union does on Kashmir, saying that please release political prisoners, most of which who are already free, hold elections, we will hold you to the promises you make on Kashmir, but not question the abrogation of Article 370. So that's purely a domestic issue. That's up to you. That's the American Indian Constitution,
Right.
and that's the end of that.
Just a second, the noises which Pramit is talking about, those are noises which people like us also make out here, so that we can live with. It's on more intrusive things that I'm a little concerned.
I agree totally about the biggest issue right now, I think, is the S-400. If you were to slap very strong sanctions, there are a lot of people in India who are going to turn around and say, look, we've been telling you that the Americans are not reliable partners in defense issues. That would become a huge issue. So as Sushant said, we'd have to watch and see whether these are mild sanctions, which are just, to send a message, or something stronger.
Right.
But I probably make a prediction that the S-400 will not trigger sanctions. I'm almost certain of that.
Okay.
The S-400 will not trigger sanctions.
Well, at least that's music to some ears, at least. So let's do this. Let's wind up. I think the inauguration speech is done. The oaths have been taken. America has a new president and a new vice president today. The Biden-Harris administration is formally in place. I just want to take one-liners from all three of you at the end. What are your key expectations? Expectations automatically becomes more than one line. So what is your key expectation from the Biden-Harris administration? And I'll start with you, Sushant.
Frankly, I just hope, India-US relations can move forward. I hope there is greater clarity in the US on how it wishes to handle China. I really hope that the Americans actually start pulling their weight as far as the world is concerned. Uh, but if the Americans are going to go into a shell because of their own domestic compulsions, then I think it's a matter of serious concern for some of us who think that the American lead is still required in the world to take it to a better place.
All right, interesting. Resolve. What's your take?
I have a very, very simple answer for you. China, China, China. That's it.
So almost matching what Sushant said, but you're more focused in China. Of course, he's more focused on the entire world, really. Pramit, from you.
I look both east and west.
Yes, Pramit, and you.
Well, for me, I do actually look at the domestic side. He needs to restore the legitimacy of the Washington system within his country for him to be able to operate overseas. And so he has to be able to balance these two without completely surrendering America's foreign policy on one end, otherwise, or not healing America domestically. We need America to heal because we want America to work overseas. And I'm curious to see how he's going to do that, because it's not going to be an easy task for a person who hasn't had a very distinguished career of getting it done.
Right. Not going to be easy for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the next 4 years to come, but not going to be very difficult also, given the fact that he does have a legacy of Trump to deal with. So it's going to be a sort of a very, very tough times ahead for both of them. But thank you all for joining us. Thank you, viewers, for watching this broadcast. We'll keep coming back to you with more. Keep watching HindustanTimes.com.